Brace yourself. You're about to enter the SKOLHole, where we talk anything and everything Minnesota Vikings. Don't forget to bring a change of clothes. It might get dirty. Here are your hosts, Draft Season's own, One Bar and Lust.
All right, welcome back to another episode of SKOLHole. I am One Bar, and we're going to do a little bit something different today. We're going to do a new series at SKOLHole called Top 5, where we pretty much bring you top 5 anything Vikings related. With the draft over, with free agency over, we've got a little dead time here in a couple months before training camp starts. So along with our weekly podcast where we're diving in all that fun stuff, depth charts and everything. So whether it is the top 5 backup tight ends of all time for the Vikings or the top 5 wide receivers drafted by the Vikings in round 6, they're going to be a little bit random, a little bit weird. We don't want to just keep it to the, hey, here's our top 5 running backs of all time. So we'll try to throw a little bit of wrinkle in each one. And by all means, when you listen to this and we got somebody that did not make the top 5 that you think, you let us hear it. Twitter, Matt_Falk, F-A-L-K. So let us know what you think. Today we are going to start off with the top 5 quarterbacks drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. And this isn't just top 5 quarterbacks. So guys like Brett Favre, Randall Cunningham, who else we got? Warren Moon. You know, these guys are not on the list. They have to be officially drafted by the Vikings. Let me tell you, we've had some dandies. We've had Gino Torrettas. We've had Chad Mays. We've had Tyler Thigpens. What else? Man, I'm missing a good one. Well, obviously T-Jack, Ponder, Teddy Bridgewater. So those are just a few who did not make the list. But we got plenty of goodies too. So we're going to go backwards, and we are starting with number 5, the fifth best quarterback drafted by the Vikings, round 8, out of East Texas State. Wade Wilson, baby. Wade Wilson. And not only is this guy good on the field, but he has probably the best nickname ever for a Minnesota Viking, Whiskey. Whiskey Wilson, baby. And, unfortunately, Wade Wilson passed away over this past year. But he definitely made his mark on the field and in the hearts of Viking fans everywhere. Wilson came in. He was a backup until the mid-'80s. I think it was like 87-ish. And what I remember him for, and this was right when I started watching, old enough to start watching, is just the battles with Tommy Kramer. You know, Kramer had quite a few injuries, so Wade Wilson would come in. But he had some good years too. And Pro Bowler in 1988, his outstanding stats of 15 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. That got him to the Pro Bowl. But he got to play with some of my favorite guys growing up, Steve Jordan, Anthony Carter, Hassan Jones. Led the Vikings to that NFC Championship game where they lost to the Redskins. But this guy had some longevity, man. 17 seasons. He played 17 seasons. And, that was with the Cowboys, Raiders, Vikings. I'm probably missing somebody. But one thing that really surprised me looking back at Wade Wilson's stats is he definitely could make some plays with his legs. A lot of yards on the ground. But what sticks out to me, like I already said it, was just his battles with Wade Wilson, which he eventually won. Wilson's tenure came to an end, I believe, in 90 when he got hurt and Rich Gannon took over the helms. Wilson definitely had some big moments for the Vikings, and a round 8 guy out of East Texas State to make the list. Well done, Whiskey. So Whiskey Wilson is number 5. Brings us to the 4th best quarterback ever drafted by the Minnesota Vikings, and this is another late rounder, round 9 guy out of Florida State in 1992. Brad Johnson, couple stints with the Vikings. From 92 to 98 was his first stint. And, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. This guy was a backup quarterback at Florida State during his time. And the Vikings still drafted him. So, little strange and kind of awesome that a backup quarterback still managed to get drafted. But they definitely saw something in him. And it paid off because, like I said, he had 2 stints. 92 to 98 was his first one. Played in the World League. He was a backup until 96 when he took over for Warren Moon. And he continued to start until 98, our big season. But he started the first couple games in 98 when Cunningham took over, and we all know how that went. Brad Johnson definitely didn't see the field after that. Cunningham was named the starter after that season. And this is where the fantastic stuff comes in. Many of you might not remember, but he was traded for a first, a second, and a third-round pick, which is pretty crazy considering it's, no offense, but it's Brad Johnson. Quite the haul to get back. And even better is what we got in return, which was Culpepper the following year, who may or may not be on this list. And then also Jimmy Kleinsasser. So that was a hell of a return. And not only that, but he ended up coming back. When did he come back? He came back in 2005 for a brief stint. He didn't really do a ton when he came back. And that was when T-Jack was in the mix. So we obviously gave over the helm to Tavares Jackson. We all know that went down. But even during his time where Brad Johnson wasn't here, he actually had a big season for the Redskins. After we traded him, he had one good year. And we all know he went to Tampa and got that beautiful Super Bowl ring. So Brad Johnson, great career. Who would have thought? Round 9 guy, backup. And again, thank you for Culpepper and Jimmy Kleinsasser. So Brad Johnson is number 4 on the list, which brings us to number 3. The third best quarterback drafted, Dante Culpepper. Already mentioned him. Some might think this is a little low. Maybe he should be number 2, but round 1, 1999, Central Florida. This was the same year as Tim Couch, Donovan McNabb, Achilles Smith. This is looked at as quite the year of quarterbacks. Little did we know that 2 of these guys were going to be full-blown turds in Achilles Smith and Tim Couch. McNabb had a great career, but we don't care about those guys. Let's talk about our boy Dante Culpepper. Culpepper, obviously, the stuff that stuck out to him, what made him so intriguing, is big old size, small hands, yes, but ginormous, big arm. A lot of excitement around Dante Culpepper when he came in, and Cunningham was the quarterback at the time, so Culpepper got to take a nice seat for a little while. For his first year anyways, but when he came in his first year, he lit it up. He did not waste any time chucking that thing. You know, he had Randy Moss, he had some weapons on offense, and he went 11-5 as his first year starter. Led the team to the NFC Championship game, and we all know how that ended up with the big old 41 donut, which is gross. But he had some huge years for the Vikings. I think one year 39 touchdowns. Another year he had 33 touchdowns, and he had 25 touchdowns. And we all know what he did with his legs, with his big body. Watching him and Randy Moss for that handful of years was there wasn't anything better. Those guys were almost unstoppable at times. I mean, Culpepper looked like a defensive tackle out there, just whooping ass. I do got to say, though, giving Culpepper all this praise, there was one thing that always mildly bothered me about Culpepper, and I think I'm in the minority here, but it's when he got his roll on. Big play. He starts doing that roll. I don't know what it was. I did not enjoy that. Did I do that with him at times when I saw him do it on TV? You're damn right I did, but just some part about that I did not enjoy. So I think it's safe to say that Culpepper was one of the best players in the NFL during that 2000 to 2005 range. Defenses were terrified of him, especially when we had Moss. In 2005, he started off with a really crappy year, a lot of interceptions, and then all of a sudden in Game 7, he blows apart his knee, which would be his final time with the Vikings. They did end up trading him in the offseason to the Dolphins and surprisingly got a second-round pick from the Dolphins, so thank you, Miami. That pick didn't turn out to be one of the more sexy picks. We got Ryan Cook, and when I think about it now, I probably would have rather have a no-legged Culpepper than Ryan Cook, but Cook offered some nice depth for a couple years there. But we got a second-rounder. He went to Miami. He had a stint with the Raiders, went to even Detroit for a couple years, and he still put up a couple good plays, but nothing like the years of 2000, 2001 and between 2004 where he just was one of the best players in the NFL. So Culpepper going down as my third best quarterback ever drafted by the Vikings. And I think number 2, it was pretty close, but number 2, 2-minute Tommy. Tommy Kramer, Rice, round 1, 1977. 1977, I was still bouncing around in my dad's nuts. I was not here when he got drafted. So 2-minute Tommy, which is kind of a coincidence because in high school I was 2-second Matty. Unfortunately, those 2 seconds were spent by myself, but we share that. We have that in common. But he was drafted to be the heir apparent to Fran Tarkenton. Kramer had a big old arm out of Rice. Throughout the 80s, he got the shit kicked out of him on the field. A lot of injuries, but when he was out there, I think he was pretty damn underrated. He had a Pro Bowl in 86. He was the first quarterback to throw for over 450 yards twice and also had a 6-touchdown game. So when you think of Tommy Kramer, that's not the stuff that sticks out for me, but I am still a little bit of a young buck when it comes to Tommy Kramer. I got to rely on watching highlights and seeing stats because by the time I was watching this was probably in the mid-'80s, and that's when Wade Wilson was starting to dip into his time, and Kramer was hurt. And by the way, that 6 touchdown game, that was against the Packers. Boom. Oh. So Kramer was, if it wasn't for injuries, I think his numbers would be a lot bigger, and he'd have a lot more accolades. But that's just part of the game. And like I mentioned with Whiskey Wilson, that was one of the more fun quarterback battles to watch in the 80s. Was Tommy Kramer and Wade Wilson. But overall, Kramer was the better quarterback. He's one of the 50 greatest Vikings, and he was with the Vikings until '89 when he was released, when he handed over the keys to Mr. Wilson for a short stint. But Kramer ended up going to play for the Saints for not very long, and then he was out of the league. But still a pretty good haul as far as 1977 to 1990, especially for the beating he took. And actually, Tommy Kramer is one of the more I follow him on Twitter these days, and he hasn't been on there. I think he's been on there for probably about a year or two. He's actually pretty entertaining. He's always out there looking for Vikings fans, so I suggest to go follow him on Twitter. He's a good follow. So 2-Minute Tommy, officially the number 2 quarterback on the list, which brings us to number 1. Yeah, it's a shoo-in. It's Fran Tarkenton, easy peasy. Round 3, 1961. This might actually be one of the best draft picks they had, considering it's round 3. And Fran Tarkenton, there's no sense of going through all of his accolades, all of his stats. He's one of the best. He's one of the best that ever played. And fortunately, he was wearing that beautiful shade of purple when he did it. Yes, he had a little stint with the Giants for a couple years there, but 13 years with the Vikings. He was a 9-time Pro Bowler. 340 plus touchdowns, 47,000 passing yards, and a ton on the ground. He had like 3,500 plus rushing yards on the ground. Not only go down as the best quarterback in Vikings history, but also one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history. He took the Vikings to a handful of Super Bowls, never was able to take it home, but he did something that all the other quarterbacks since then haven't been able to do, and that gets to the Super Bowl. So he was just a little guy, like 6 foot 190, just making plays out of nothing. Like I said, my only thing that pisses me off about Fran Tarkenton is I didn't get to watch him play. So that is our official first top 5 from SKOLHole, top 5 quarterbacks drafted by the Minnesota Vikings. So if you think I missed somebody, or you're just pissed off, why isn't Culpepper number 2, or why isn't Whiskey Wilson number 1? You let me hear it. Let us know. Twitter, Matt_Falk, FALK. And we'll be back in the coming weeks. We're going to try to do one of these a week. So be sure to tune in along with the regular podcast.